So again, welcome everyone. We are so happy to have you with us today for the fifth webinar in the AAC&U-CILMAR Global Learning Webinar Series. And again, I'm Dawn Michelle Whitehead, the Vice President of the Office of Global Citizenship for Campus, Community, and Careers at AAC&U. And on behalf of CILMAR and AAC&U, I'm delighted to welcome you to this webinar. As I've mentioned in past webinars, this partnership between AAC&U and CILMAR started back around 2019 when Chris Atchison-Clare convened a group to explore professional development for interculturalists, global learning leaders, international educators, and those interested in multicultural education. And that initial convening sparked several collaborative activities, including this webinar series. And as I mentioned, this webinar series is based on the AAC&U Value Initiative and the value rubrics of intercultural knowledge and competence and the global learning rubric. And so without further ado, let's kick off this fifth webinar, checking in with the skill of intercultural empathy and perspective taking. And to get us started, I'll turn it over to our two facilitators, Tatiana Babich-Williams and Kwesi Ewudzi. I'll turn it over to Kwesi to get us started.
Hello, everyone. Good morning. Thanks for joining us, or afternoon. I'm in the Central Time, so yeah, I'm Kwesi Ewudzi, Director of Culture Beyond Borders, and my company we promote facilitate faculty-led travel to African destinations. So if anybody's interested in that, let me know. Tatiana, want to say hello?
Yeah, my name is Tatiana Babich-Williams, and I am a senior lecturer of Italian at Purdue University, and I'm also the faculty fellow for the CILMAR, for Center for Intercultural Learning, Mentorship, Assessment, and Research. Welcome, everyone.
And for today, we're going to be discussing empathy, intercultural empathy, and the global perspective taking. We're going to go over some conceptual and operational definitions. So we're going to be all on the same page about what these terms mean, have some experiential activities so that you can take with you, go over some assessments and how to measure these things and methods to do so, and have some time for Q&A. Learning outcomes wise, like I said, because we're going to spend some time on that definition, you're going to be able to describe intercultural empathy and global perspective taking. Afterwards, you're also going to be able to identify some experiential learning activities you can use. We're going to go over some in detail and just list some others. So you're going to have a resource list and select an appropriate method or tool for assessment. Again, some we'll go over in detail and some we'll just list. So you should be able to leave here with quite a bit of resources. To start off with is the definition part, so we'll jump right into that. I'm really happy to see that the chat is getting some activity. One more thing we would like for you to put in the chat, because we're trying to differentiate between the colloquial meaning of empathy and the working meaning we'll go with. So what comes to mind before we even get started? What comes to mind when you think of empathy or when you think of perspective taking? Can you put some thoughts in the chat? Be in someone's shoes, reserving judgment, openness, understanding, and flexibility.
Trying to understand what another person's feeling. Listening, feeling with.
Yeah.
Humility.
Okay.
Awareness of self and willingness to consider others' perspective. Excellent, excellent. Very nice.
Good.
Okay.
Tatiana, we can jump into the meanings that we want to emphasize on when we talk about empathy.
Right. So excellent. Thank you for everyone for sharing in the chat. So as we can see from everything, all the definitions that you provided, empathy is a complex, complicated, and contested often notion that has gained popularity actually relatively recently in the 20th and 21st centuries. And it is not easy to define it. Most commonly, we say that empatheia from Greek means in feeling. So going into the feeling of another person, being able to put yourself in another person's shoes, like we saw in many of your definitions. The English term empathy was actually a 1908 translation of the German term Einfühlung, and it was used with reference to aesthetic experience. So basically, appreciation of art was understood as dependent on our self-projection into the object of art, like the one that you can see behind me. So it already kind of presupposes a combination of a cognitive effort and the bodily feeling. And this term today tends to acquire different nuances, different valences, depending on the discipline that discusses it. So be it neuroscience or psychology, aesthetics, ethics, medicine, law, and of course, intercultural studies. So there are basically three aspects of empathy that seem to emerge from literature. So the first one is the emotional empathy, or the ability to feel what another person feels. So what we commonly think of when we think of empathy. Then there's cognitive empathy, or sometimes called intellectual empathy, which is the ability to understand how a person may think or feel in a particular situation. And as we can see, it already requires the ability of imaginative perspective taking, or the ability to perceive the world as the other person does. And then there's the empathic concern, which is the perspective taking that elicits some sort of caring or compassionate response. And here in this word response, we have yet another piece of the puzzle. So the communicative empathy component, which is this expression of empathic thoughts and feelings towards people. And it can be expressed through words or through actions, right? So it brings in that piece of communication to empathy. So what do we say, how we say it, how we listen, what we do, what kinds of actions we actually take. Okay, so we can move on, and now let's go to the AAC&U rubrics and delve a little bit deeper into the definitions of empathy and perspective taking that's proposed by these rubrics. So the first one, you can see the first row, it's taken from the Intercultural Knowledge and Competence rubric, and at level 4, capstone 4, it describes empathy as the ability to interpret intercultural experience from the perspectives of own and more than one worldview, and to demonstrate ability to act in a supportive manner that recognizes the feelings of another cultural group. And we can see that the definition incorporates those different aspects of empathy that we just discussed. So there's the emotional piece, recognizes the feelings, there's the cognitive perspective taking. It can interpret, somebody can interpret from more than just one's own worldview. And there is the empathic concern or response. So this person can act in a supportive manner. As we can see from the rubric, we have different stages of development of this skill. So empathy is understood as a learned ability that can be developed over time rather than a static personality trait. When we look at the global perspective taking, how it is defined by the AAC&U rubric for global learning, we can see that it contextualizes basically the perspective taking ability within the complex and interconnected global systems, natural, physical, social, cultural, and so on. And it is the ability to evaluate and learn from perspectives and experiences that are different from one's own, and then to apply that knowledge to solving pressing issues on a global scale. Basically, global perspective taking is imagined as a bridging technique between conflicting positions, we can say.
order of these webinars is quite interesting. This pyramid for Deardorff's pyramid of intercultural competency kind of shows us all those webinars that came before our foundation to leading up to the empathy piece right here, right? So the openness, attitude you bring to this to a situation, the knowledge. Do you have the appropriate information to do that perspective taking? Because that requires information before you can accurately do it. And then the skill is a practice. We saw listening in the chat as part of the understanding of empathy. Are you listening? Are you observing? Is this being transactional, or is this just your own view that you're putting onto a situation? And all of these combined gets you to the ability to actually have that intercultural empathy and global perspective taking to the level that we're talking about. So we just wanted to situate this piece with the pieces that came before it of this series. So with that, we're going to go to two activities in details and with the learning outcome of what you can take and also do in practice on your own.
Okay, so our first activity is called a Flowers Point of View. And by doing this activity, we will practice our imaginative, perspective taking. And it will help us to identify the possibilities and the limits of empathy. So in this first activity, we are taking the role of participants, right, rather than facilitators, and really experiencing the activity. This activity is also in the Hubble, and I just wanted to mention it exists in Italian because I use it in my advanced Italian course. Okay, so let's experience this activity. And I am going to give you a prompt. The prompt is in a second now, I will show you some flowers. And so we are asking you to imagine the point of view of the flowers, and we will be taking 4 minutes to write from the point of view of the flowers by using the first person singular I or we. So we will stay in this room, and if you need to, you can turn off your camera. And I'm asking you to use maybe the piece of paper or pen, or maybe you can use your phone or tablet or computer. So any way that you can record your thoughts and feelings. Imagine the point of view of the flowers and write from that point of view for 4 minutes. Okay, so I'm going to ask you now to finish the sentence. Don't worry if it's not all completed. And just a reminder, I'd like you to have handy what you've written, because now we are going to head to breakout rooms for 6 minutes in groups of 3. And I'm asking you to do three things. Number 1, share what you wrote, and then discuss how did it feel to write from the flower's point of view. And lastly, analyze what information did you use to imagine it. And I would just say best practice would be to take turns, right, rather than one person answering all the questions, so that we all get to go in these 6 minutes. Okay, so do we have Aparajita and
Hi.
yeah, hi Christina, nice to see you. Hi Kelsey. So if you wouldn't mind sharing what you've written.
Yeah. So I wrote a very short poem because I was just looking outside. It was sunny and beautiful. So I wrote, "Beneath the sun, I bloom so bright, drinking in golden light. With petals soft, I dance in air, a fleeting beauty beyond compare."
I love that. I can share next if you want. I kind of wrote about being taken from your home and maybe separated from roots. And then this idea of, I kind of applied some emotions too. So maybe mixed emotions, or feeling kind of torn because you're because, well, I had to write an I, right? So we know we are providing some joy maybe to the people in this room or the people in this building, and yet feeling sadness of, leaving home. So, and also maybe meeting some flowers that you wouldn't have otherwise met.
We are flowers, we are colorful, we hate when people cut us off and put us into vases. We revive with the sun every day, and so we love to stay under the sun. We enjoy life, although it is brief. That's why we dress ourselves in beautiful colors. We are here to share the earth and embellish it.
Okay, so the question was, how did it feel to write from the flower's point of view? And then what kind of information did each of you use to actually imagine the flower's point of view?
I can go first. I think when I was writing the flowers' point of view, the flowers that you showed were very fresh and very refreshing, right? So I thought that, okay, and it was sunny outside. So I thought that, okay, I will go ahead and talk about a beautiful day, like how it can brighten, like a beautiful sunlight can brighten your day. That was my feeling. And I think, especially it was early part of the morning and I was feeling happy with the day going on. So I think that was one of the feeling that I had, and that reflected in my poem in some way. Because when I wrote those 4 lines and I reflected back, I thought that, oh, okay, so I am happy today, and that's being reflected in my poem. So that's what my take was while I was writing those 4 lines.
I can share, and I'll try to keep it down to a minute. The exercise always makes me connect with my personal feelings towards caring about nature in general. And I remember when you gave it to us, and still now, Tatiana, I always feel sad when people destroy nature, okay? And cutting off flowers makes me feel the same. It's part of the same feelings I have. So I always connect with this ideal of preserving everything on earth as pure and as healthy as it is born, let's say.
Yeah, I think I always am projecting maybe a part of my emotional state and a part of maybe the emotional states of the people I have been speaking with, you know, like friends and family as well. So it's interesting how that always shows up.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Thanks for staying and for sharing. So everyone, welcome back. I hope that there were some good conversations in the breakout room. And now let's discuss this activity a little bit further. You can feel free to unmute and just share, or you can type your thoughts in the chat. So these are our questions. What surprised you, if anything, about the similarities and differences with what other people wrote?
Well, I can share, excuse me, just from our room. The three of us wrote very differently, or thought very differently about the exercise. I wrote from the perspective of one of the flowers. One of the colleagues wrote perspectives of each of the different flowers in comparison to each other. Another one included the entire room beyond the vase, instead of just focusing on how the flowers felt in the vase, but what they were seeing, including, I'll point out, all of us on the screen.
Thank you. Yeah, that's very often the case, right? So how these perspectives differ and some things that maybe never occurred to me, right, seem natural to another person. Yeah, and then someone else said, all three of us touched on the idea of the flowers being out of sorts or in need of space or nutrients, right? Yeah, and it goes along with what Kelsey also mentioned in our little group, that we do tend to kind of, project what we are feeling, right, onto the flowers and assume that is the flower's point of view. Louise mentioned we all used our senses in some way to imagine what their experience feels like. Yes, absolutely. Emma said our group all had an element of collectivism and being part of something bigger. Yes, and that's another beautiful thing about this activity, that it sort of reveals the worldview, right, behind our perspective. Very nice. Very nice. Thank you. So I think we already touched upon what you wrote connect to anything you're feeling right now, right? So many of us just sort of projected our own feelings onto the flower. And my next question is, how might this activity have been different if I asked you to write from the point of view of a person, someone in the group, or from the point of view of the chair, for example?
From the point of view of the chair, I might kind of remove some of my emotion, I guess, because chairs are non-living objects, and so it would be hard to kind of think about how they're feeling and if they care about things like temperature and the environment. So it'd probably be a bit more cold or removed, which is not fair to the chair, but yeah.
Right. Excellent. Thank you. Yeah. So it reveals what we consider animate, what we consider inanimate, right? How we connect to objects around in our world, and what kind of empathy do we extend to people, and what kind of empathy do we extend to maybe other inhabitants of the world. Michelle says, we talked about how you can never truly inhabit the flower's perspective, because you can never remove your own personality, perspective, and lived experience. Even when you're trying to, you can never fully remove yourself. Excellent, excellent observation. Thank you. Luis also said, I was not worried about offending the flowers if I said the wrong thing. So that would be a difference, right? If we were to write from a person's point of view. Alexandra adds, it depends on the context where you frame it and your own context. Absolutely. Thank you all for sharing. So why is this activity? Why do we do it when we talk about empathy? What is the connection?
I like the practice of taking another perspective, another point of view in a low risk situation. So, you didn't ask me to take your point of view or another person's. Yes, Louise, it's a friendly entry point, right? We can ask people, even those who perhaps are not used to taking other perspectives, and there's not really a wrong way.
Exactly. Thank you. Thank you so much. So Louise also said it highlights our limitations and biases. It does. So I spelled out some of these takeaways here. I think we touched upon most of these. I would just like to say, so what this activity brings out for me is also this importance of the communication piece, right? So we are asked to imagine the point of view of a flower, not a human. And it kind of helps us see how much the listening part and the communication part actually matters when we are empathizing with people, right? Because that part is safely removed from this activity, but it kind of just brings into sharp relief how important it is to listen. We often talk about culture as an iceberg, but we can also see humans as an iceberg, right? And to get really deep into those, how another person thinks or feels, we really need to have some good skills. Listening without judgment, being open to communication, rephrasing what we heard, and checking that we are really empathizing. One last thing that I was going to ask. So if now from the participants, we start thinking about this activity as facilitators, how do you think learners in your professional context would feel participating in this activity? And do you think like you would need to maybe modify anything to adapt it to your context?
If I may, Tatiana, my feeling is that all of us, or most of us, have somehow some basic knowledge on empathy, intercultural communication, and so on. So I think this is an excellent question, and I was wondering precisely how would I do it with students, or basically people who do not have any knowledge on empathy, intercultural skills, etc.
Right. So you think that this would be a good entry point to talk about empathy, right? And then maybe tie it into cultural context, right? Yeah, that you can provide. Exactly. Yes. Leslie says, I wonder about having different flowers for the students to write about. How would that impact the activity? Yes, and every little detail matters, right? Is it the living flowers in the pot? Is it a picture of a flower? Are those the cut flowers? Yes, I think I've done it in different ways, and the context really influences also how we imagine the perspective. Greg says, I think our students would enjoy it as part of our cross-cultural training during pre-departure. I think you could easily modify it with scenes of different cultures and ask students to analyze the scenes. Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, any kind of perspective-taking activity is useful, especially in the context of pre-departure. And yeah, so excellent. Then we have another comment, high risk factor asking people to share writing might be difficult in an orientation situation where I don't know the students and they don't know each other. That's fair, yes. So I think knowing your audience, maybe have some kind of pre-assessment is always useful, for sure. Okay, thank you. Thank you so much. We can move on to our second activity.
All right. We're going to dig into a second one here, empathy in the London Tube. It's a fresh one, so this is the first time we're doing this. We put it together, so let's take a look. The aim of the London Tube activity will be much like the flower point of view, to practice perspective taking and empathy taking, and then consider empathic concern. And discuss the limits and possibilities. So what are we going to be doing? We're just going to have two groups. One, we're going to leave into this main room. The other will go into a breakout room. We're going to show an image. And the image is a PSA sign I saw in the London Tube, actually, back in 2008, and I had such a strong reaction to it. And you are going to be taking the role as a big group of an expert panel being asked for feedback before let's say, the PSA is launched. Then we're going to come back together, discuss the conversation, and discuss the similarities and differences. When you are in the groups, you'll have two questions. The group here in the main room will have one set of questions, and the group in the breakout room will have another set of questions. And Tatiana will go in the breakout room, and I will stay in this room. But for the group going with Tatiana, you'll be asked. This is the sign, by the way. This is the prompt. There was a series of these signs with these characters and little messages on them. Together in for London, a little thought from each of us, a big difference for everyone. So kind of the do's and don'ts, or describing proper protocol in the London Tube. So these are the two. This one is saying I won't play loud music. And this is the one that struck me, which says I won't eat smelly food. So that's where we're going to focus for the group in the breakout room. Your question will be, why would somebody need to or want to eat or not eat on the tube? So we're just going to explore that question. And then what sort of care and compassion response does the concern that you all raised from the first question, what kind of response does that elicit? For the second group, we're going to focus on the wording. How does it impact different groups in different ways? And again, as the expert panel giving feedback to those about to plaster this all over the London Tube, what kind of caring or compassionate response does it elicit? And will you provide us some feedback? All right. Is the breakout rooms going? Okay, I think. So when you see this sign, like I said, this is a sign I saw and I had some reaction. when you see the sign and the wording especially, what comes up for you all? Feel free to unmute, or I can also monitor the chat.
Smelly is already a like a judgment word.
Mhm.
I agree with Robin. I feel the same. Like smelly is really striking you.
But I do also think the way that it's worded is, instead of a request, like, please don't eat smelly food or please don't play loud music, it's being framed as someone taking responsibility for their actions as opposed to being asked to do something to change their behavior.
Okay.
Because you're owning it. I won't eat smelly food. Regardless of how we feel about smelly, I see it as also being, though, an ownership as opposed to a request.
Other ways, the wording, how do you think different groups will be impacted differently? What does it mean?
I think the folks who, like the folks that are being referenced in the second image, like I won't eat smelly food, I think it's pretty clear that we're talking about food that isn't like standard or like normalized or that everyone's relatively familiar with, or that we all have a common understanding of like acceptable food. And everything that's outside of that is like, obviously, you know, not to eat that, but it's like, I don't know, actually. That's so subjective. And my nose is more sensitive to other scents than it is to other scents. I do also think it's interesting that in the first image, there's like an alternative that's offered. It's not like I won't play music. It's just I won't play my music out loud. You know, like you can have your music, just wear headphones. But the second is just so broad and generalized. It's like, okay, so what exactly would you like me to do instead? Yeah.
I know you asked
Yes.
about the words, but I also am finding there's some ageism in the image too.
Thank you.
And there isn't a prohibition against eating food, just smelly food.
There's
Certain
that.
foods are okay.
Yeah. I agree with Robin again. I also, it strikes me as odd the let's say I don't remember the word in English. I'm sorry. The characteristic
Features.
features.
Facial
Thank
features.
you.
Yeah.
Thank you. The features they use, which resemble a lot Asian people. So, oh God, it's really
There's implications there too.
a lot. Even the skin color.
And for me, quickly, I think we can move to question 2. And this was brought up, you know, if you go to France and you have some cheeses that you smell, oh yeah, that's normal, right? And then if you go to other cultures, you smell something you're not used to. So now we're talking about is smelly just stuff. You mean not familiar? Like, so what are we really talking about? So what kind of caring or compassionate response you're giving to this PSA designers based off of them asking your opinion?
I just think it's interesting, this question about caring or compassionate response, because it's towards whom, right? It's framed, the announcement is framed as caring and compassionate towards everyone. Like, you don't want to impose on other people. You want to make sure that you're not negatively impacting, you know, the people around you. But that's sort of a whole group caring and compassion. And, you know, how much does that take into consideration the individual needs of any given person in that group?
Yeah, I would say that, you know, extending the sort of benefit of the doubt, that the intention was to request courtesy in public settings, right? That may have been the intention, but that it's received really differently as a very specific message to very specific people, right? Who are not participating in a public forum in the way that this person prefers. Right? Or that their culture identifies as appropriate. Very limited view.
and to piggyback off of what Chris mentioned as well, in the effort just to, be overly, to look out for the large group, you can, in that effort, just saying, okay, then we're just going to go with the majority. We're going to go with what the majority thinks is, what do you call it? Not smelly and all those things, right? So we're going to talk about some of the nuances of what does this mean about maybe conflicting point of views and things like that. So I came up with some solutions. We'll see if it comes up in the group when I had more time than you all to think about this. So and then, is there any last minute thoughts? What would you suggest to the people they should change or adjust or improve?
If it's really about Together for London and trying to be considerate of other people, I wonder if it would be best not to talk about smelly food at all. I mean, not to talk about odors, but maybe to concentrate on something more like cleaning up after yourself. Like if you're going to eat, throw away your trash or something like that. That is more sort of like public good oriented instead of encroaching on the territory of some people getting to decide what's offensive.
Mhm.
Yeah, I wondered about the data points. I realize that's not, you're asking about compassion and not data, but like really, how many complaints do they actually get about food? Really? I think the trash, Chris's point about trash is probably, I mean, anyway, evidence-based
Right, right.
compassion, I think.
How necessary was this?
Yeah.
So I was thinking, yes, for wording, I was thinking, you know, they're trying to go for short and cute. Sure, I get it. But, maybe fragrant or highly fragrant food takes out something of the judgmental kind. Um, and then there's some few things I mentioned I will share in the larger group so I don't repeat myself. But yes, thank you
Yeah,
for this.
but what about not even using an adjective, just asking people to not eat, if possible, food inside the,
Hmm.
the
Hmm.
subway,
Hmm.
basically. Um,
That's also a good point. Um,
But people between
okay.
shifts might need to eat on the way to get to
exactly.
work.
I agree. I agree. I've thought about it as well. Exactly. People who work a lot don't have time even to have lunch.
Hmm. Hmm. That's
Absolutely.
that's one of the things.
That's why I like Chris's idea as well of inviting rather to clean if you have food, maintain the subway clean, and we have to think about the music.
Yeah.
Great, 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 great. Well, I think it's great because it's the first time we're doing this. I'm glad it's it's uh generating discussion. Okay.
But if anybody from the breakout group would like to share, we had some excellent ideas. Feel free to unmute yourself and just maybe if you'd like to bring out some highlights. So we discussed the question, why would somebody choose or want to or have to eat or not eat on the tube? And then we discussed the question, what can we do or say to show empathy and understanding of these different perspectives on the issue, right? So does anybody from the breakout room just want to summarize or just say what we discussed?
Well, I'll just jump in and say that we discussed a couple of different reasons why the person might be eating. It might be time constraints or long distances needed to travel within London.
Yes.
They may have a medical condition that requires them to eat on a regular basis. So maybe they're hypoglycemic and need to watch their blood sugar. And what was the last one? I just lost it.
We also talked about on the opposite end of the spectrum, if somebody has severe allergies and they would like not want to eat or be surrounded by people who are eating. We also talked about the issue of mindfulness.
And food scarcity, that was the other point. So maybe this person has enough food for him or herself, but doesn't have enough to bring home to the family. So.
We also talked about some of the cultural maybe reasons, right? So how appropriate it is or not to eat in public places. And there was also this concern about the cleanliness and the hygiene, right, in the transportation system.
Thank you. Somebody want to share from our group? What did we get into about the wording?
Some people brought up absent of anything else, the word smelly is an inherently judgmental and also subjective term, and that how that might overlap with cultural biases, which may or may not even be reflected in the cartoon figures, but there are certain suggestions that they may be, quote unquote, out of the defaults or out of the privileged group. That's somewhat open to interpretation. I think there's a stronger case to be made, depending on how you want to look at it. But either way, it's a subjective terminology. And so when you introduce that, there's a lot of qualification there that introduces some questions at the very least.
And for the second second question, group A, did you all get to it?
Yes, so we did talk a little bit about what can we say or do, right, to show empathy, understanding of these different perspectives. Does anybody from our group want to share some points?
I mean, I can talk about what we talked about toward the end there, which is that there's an issue, I think, in the way that the entire image is set up to create two people looking at the spectator as an implicit third. And that this sets up or reinforces that judgment that's in those words like smelly, right, or loud. And that in constructing an ad that interpolates you as a subject as either being the normative person or identifies you as being the non-normative person and therefore someone who's not included in that spectatorial position, right, got a significant problem. And so creating an image that is entirely about getting you to stand in the right place might be a bad choice. So.
Thank you, Joshua. We have had some very creative ideas on how to reword this slogan, and it was everyone writes differently. And I thought that was like really successful, right? So everyone writes differently. Also, some other ideas were giving more physical space to the people who have to eat, right? Or we didn't really touch upon it, but maybe designating also the space or the part of the car or whatever the tube is into, right? To eating.
And from our group, anybody remember any?
One comment, I love everyone writes differently. And what if we add everyone writes differently, but we all share the same space, maybe?
Still adds that consideration. That's awesome.
Very nice.
Just any one highlight from our group, then I'll wrap up some things.
The tube in London should pay us for better advertising.
We're 10 years too late.
We did note how the sort of first person approach may be encouraging people to take some ownership and act. And so if that could be continued in some way without the sort of cultural shaming and the and the problematic positionality there. But what about just like a simple question, like what if we do have something like everybody writes differently, asking a question, something like, what can I do to make everybody else's ride better or something like that?
Kind of that version of, but we're sharing the same space, but more action. Great.
Yeah, Quincy.
Yes.
Dr. Quincy, can I jump in?
Yes, John.
Also, I find it interesting. We focused a lot on why people would eat food and if they should or shouldn't eat food. And the poster's really saying, just don't eat the food the rest of us don't want to smell. Right? So there's an interesting value judgment there as well.
Yeah, yeah. Well, as you can imagine, yeah, John?
I was gonna say, and I would assume that's a very cultured assumptions.
Right. For example, does fish and chips smell? Right.
Right.
This is the London classic. How can we describe, right, the smell of fish and chips?
So, thank you. So the similarities and differences here based off of the prompts, focusing more on why we should eat, and then focusing on, kind of the wording or how it's even stated. This to me kind of leans towards some of the biases we even saw with the flower point of view. Whatever you enter the situation with, your attention goes that direction, and so it becomes very subjective when we're practicing empathy. So again, this will be another situation where you want to gather more information, gain some sort of understanding. I don't know. We're looking at our definitions of taking different worldviews and putting it into action for the empathy. The global perspective taken is the one I want to focus on, with even conflicting positions for this one. Even so, some people do need to eat, but some people can't have the food, especially for health reasons or whatnot. So what are we going to do to address conflicting positions in this case? One of the things I thought would be a good idea, other than the wonderful rewording about everybody writes differently, is have the different cars designated. This is an eating car, this is a no food car. Yeah. And so now is less of, hey, only do it the way we all accept it, but we understand you have to do it. You write differently. So this is a eating, like, we came up with smoking and not smoking, et cetera, et cetera. So that's kind of brings us back to, these things require practice, or requires attention. Were they listening? Did they have this panel? Did they, get feedback? Did they ask? Did they even want to know? So the attitude, the knowledge, and the skill leads to your ability to practice empathy. So, okay, I mentioned some of these here. To me, them failing to practice global perspective taking, they didn't put some of these conflicting attitudes taken into account. Mentioned the skills, I mentioned the bias. So let's focus on this one. How would the need for empathy show up in your workplace, or in your organization, in your classroom? How would making rules or establishing protocols or patterns, or just activities and tasks you do in the workplace, require intercultural empathy and global perspective taking based off of this activity?
May I give an example while people are thinking? I was working yesterday in a common room with my colleagues, and there's somebody who loves those artificial perfumes for rooms, ambientadores in Spanish. I don't know the word in English. And they give me a little bit of nausea. It really does, okay? So I was suffering a lot yesterday, and then at the end of a couple of hours, somebody entered and said, "Oh, it smells different today here." And I was like, "Yes, could you please just turn that off and so on?" And I was really thinking, how do you deal with this? Because it gets down to basically different ways of enjoying environment.
Space.
Space, exactly.
Thank you.
Well, the entire thrust of what my organization does is get students from across the country to sit in rooms with no knowledge of each other's backgrounds or affiliations and talk about the most divisive political issues of the day, something that a lot of teachers are terrified of in this day and age. But we really believe in the necessity of it. And as it turns out, a lot of what people are worried about is rooted in what adults think is going to be a problem rather than what students think. But obviously, it presents a need for a lot of work to go into building a sense of empathy, specifically giving people the benefit of the doubt, allowing them to get things wrong, giving them the opportunity to self-correct and hear each other out. And it's the bedrock of how we get these conversations started is focusing a lot on what we need to understand about each other and what to expect of each other before we proceed.
So a little bit of listening to each other, making sure you're creating a safe space. Any immediate last minute thoughts?
I just thought really quickly about what Christina had mentioned. I think a lot of the time it's a lot of people are afraid to say something. Like I know folks might talk with people that are not a part of the problem or the quote problem or the issue to get a sense of what they should do. When sometimes it's just as simple as saying, hey, like I'm really sensitive to like rose scents, you know, and positioning it as like, this is what I'm really sensitive to, not something that's inherently wrong with how you're operating. So I think even with the tube example of like, hey, like I'm really sensitive to like specifically the smell of kimchi, and like I'm just gonna move to the other side of the train, but I don't want you to think that like I'm moving away because this is like offending me in any way. I'm just really sensitive to this kind of thing. But I think people are afraid to admit that that they're sensitive to things as well, or they've never really considered seeing something in that way instead. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Before Jessica, and I think that's a little bit of that safe space. You know, a tube is difficult, right? Because it's not like you're gonna do a meet and greet before, but creating that space where that sharing back and forth, that listening to each other, again, that mutual exchange can lead to better empathy. Jessica?
Oh, I was going to say the same thing. I think that Michaela just said of like, it's important to not assume that. I think it's important for both people, like the person who wears the perfume, to be mindful that there may be people who are sensitive. But then if you are offended by the smell of the perfume or it bothers you, it's hard to assume that somebody would know that. And I think the person from the close-up group said, kind of having to assume like benefit of the doubt or like good intentions of if you let people know, if you use those I statements of like, I feel this when that people will care and they'll want to make sure that the space feels like more welcoming for everybody.
Excellent. Thank you. Yes. Yes. We got some great comments here, especially when you're dealing with students. Anonymous responses, again, create that safe opportunity for feedback or exchange. All right. That's the London Tube activity.
Yes, so we just wanted to mention, I highlighted here some other activities that are geared toward building empathy and perspective taking that you can find in the Hub call. So the Intercultural Learning Hub. If you're not familiar with it, we'll give you the link to it and tell you how to access it. But it is basically at a platform where you can find 800 plus intercultural activities, assessments, and things of all sorts. So I organized these activities in the ones that are maybe more geared towards complexity of empathy, others that are dealing with perspective taking, and then the third group is about listening. In the first group, Empathy, Not Sympathy, contains the Brené Brown's video, which many of you may be already familiar with, which is also a good starting point for discussing the complexity of empathy and how it differs from sympathy. Then another activity, which is called How Easy is My Daily Life, is basically designed to lead participants to understanding privilege as unearned advantage, but without initially using this term privilege. The activity lists many questions that are related to different facets of participants' identities, such as gender, sexuality, race, nationality, and then asks participants to accumulate things, maybe Legos or beads or Skittles and things like that, every time that they answer affirmatively, right? So it is a little bit similar to the privilege walk, right? But if you're familiar with that activity, but without that kinesthetic component, instead we accumulate things that tell us how easy our daily life is, right? And then by contrast, we gain an insight into how other people's situations and experiences might differ from us. And this is where the empathy piece comes in. Scenery, Machinery, People is an activity that was showcased in a previous webinar on self-awareness. It is also an excellent activity that draws attention to how we put people in different categories, and also it enables participants to reflect on the role of empathy in building relationships. So in the second category, so perspective taking, what these activities have in common is that they're asking the participants to practice the imaginative perspective taking or perspective shifting by assuming the point of view of someone with an identity that's different from their own. This is the case in if I woke up tomorrow, right? The question is, if I woke up tomorrow as a person of a different gender, or if I'm a STEM student, what if I woke up as a CLA student, right? So things like that. Or maybe it asks us to assume the point of view of someone that we would have a hard time identifying with, such as maybe a villain in the story, or maybe shift perspective in relation to a change in context. This would be the case of perspective taking and microfiction, a really interesting activity as well. I just want to highlight Saving Venice, which this is my invented title for an activity that is still in the making. It is the activity that is created by my colleague who works in School of Languages and Cultures and Engineering. And it is a role play that asks learners to adopt different points of view of different stakeholders in debating the engineering project that's called Mosè, whose system of water barriers aims to save the city of Venice from flooding, but which at the same time has negative environmental impacts on the lagoon. So it's sort of the learners are asked to assume the point of view of the engineers on the project, of a tourist, of a person who lives in Venice, a representative of an environmentalist group, and to sort of hash it out, to think about this problem from all of these different perspectives. So very useful for the global perspective taking. Kwesi?
Yes, and lastly, the last category is listening, and I really like that we ended our discussion on creating the safe space, creating these feedback loops with both activities. Through listening is how we learn about each other's experiences, about our truths, non-judgment, in the non-judgment way, listening without judgment, but to understand rather. So these activities are here to kind of start that process with whatever groups you find yourself in, effective listening inventory, the are you listening activity, listening deeply for values activities, and we're not, in terms of usage, haven't been using these so much, but these are well established on Hubble So for the third learning outcome, the methods and assessment. So we will get started on that. Tatiana?
Yeah, so we'll share some ideas on how we can assess as facilitators empathy and perspective taking. And we're going to start with the value rubrics, and then we'll offer you the other mostly open access tools for assessment that are on this list. So the first option is for assessment is to apply the value rubrics that we talked about, either in their entirety or just, isolating certain domains of the rubric, like empathy and perspective taking here, to evaluate the learning artifacts that we ask our participants to produce. This is the example in my advanced Italian course. After the activity, the flowers point of view, I ask students to reflect on these questions. So, do you consider yourself to be empathetic? Please describe an example of when you extended empathy to someone. The questions such as who benefits from empathy, right? And then maybe in which professions empathy seems to be an essential quality and why. And then I use the rubric to evaluate the learning artifacts, so they're written or they're video reflections, and I grade based on the quality of the submission, so based on criteria such as completion, complexity, and effort. And I do not evaluate based on where learners are on the rubric, right? So I can score on the rubric, but I do not assign a grade for where they are developmentally. Another great use of the value rubrics is as a learner's self-evaluation tool. It can be used at any point of the learning process, right? So beginning, midway, or at the end, to self-assess the growth. I commonly use it at the end of the semester in advanced Italian, and I ask learners to read the rubric on empathy really carefully, and then to tell me, where do you think you are now at the end of semester and why? Where do you think you were retrospectively at the beginning of the semester and why? And what is it that you need to do in order to move up on the continuum? And how would you know that you are there? So give concrete examples. So basically, they're using the rubric as a reflection tool, and they need to provide concrete examples to support that self-assessment. Next, we have the Attitude, Skills, and Knowledge short scale, or AAC&U-CILMAR. We talked about these short scales in other webinars, especially in the first one on openness. And so AAC&U-CILMAR is a Likert scale survey that measures student self-perception of learning. And the questions on this survey are aligned with that AAC&U rubric for intercultural competence, for intercultural knowledge and competence. And here I've just singled out the questions that pertain to empathy. And you can see from the question how it's aligned with the rubric. Next, similarly, we have the global learning short scale, which is aligned with the AAC&U rubric for global learning. And I've just highlighted a couple of questions that refer to the global perspective taking. Both of these short scales can be used to assess learners before the experience, at the end of the experience, or in retrospect. And the way I use them is I use the AAC&U-CILMAR at the end of the experience. And so I ask students, where do you think you are now? And then I ask them to self-assess retrospectively, where do you think you were before, at the beginning of this experience? And this helps to mitigate a little bit learners overestimating their abilities from the get-go. Another, and I'm sorry, I'm just kind of rushing through these in the interest of time, but just want to show you what we have for you. So behavioral rubric of intercultural skill development is designed as an observational feedback tool, and it describes the behaviors that correspond to different levels of development of empathy in this case. So it describes what kind of behavior we can expect to see in someone who displays empathy at the low, fledgling, moderate, or high level. And we can use it as facilitators or as instructors to grade behaviors of an individual or a group. And I would say it is more suitable for long-term engagement. So maybe, study abroad experience where you get longer when you get to know your participants, or maybe a semester-long intercultural learning with multiple interventions where you can observe these behaviors centered on action.
And the last two, the scale of ethnocultural empathy. It's a self-report instrument measuring how people feel toward racial and ethnic, others of different racial and ethnic backgrounds, 31 item survey, and it has these categories where you can see how it relates to this empathy conversation, with category 1 being empathic feelings and expressions. This is concern about communications of either discrimination or prejudice and the like. The second one being empathic perspective taking, effort to understand the experience and emotions of people from different racial and ethnic backgrounds. A third one is the acceptance of cultural difference, understanding, accepting, and valuing of cultural traditions and customs of others from different backgrounds, and then empathetic awareness. So that knowledge gathering stage that we discussed. So that is this scale, and it just has that very specific to racial and ethnic background differences. Another one that you will have a lot of information from CILMAR is the Beliefs, Events, and Values Inventory Bevy. This is a mixed methods instrument with both quantitative and qualitative aspect. It's about 30 minutes to complete. It can be used in all sorts of situations, but education, research, leadership, and even on the individual mental health side. 30 years of research and practice in both US and international settings. Chris will be able to razzle dazzle you on that more than I can. But the parts I want to point out is that the Bevy has 17 scales that fall into 7 domains, and 2 of those scales have are very relevant to the conversation we're having, with one being emotional attunement in the self-access scale, the comfort of your own and others' emotionality, being socially needy, being expressions that affect others. You don't mind showing your emotions in front of your family or others close to you. And the other scale that is relevant is the socio-emotional convergence scale in the critical thinking. And this scale is diving into perspective taking, critical thinking, motivational attributions, also attitudes, feelings, what derives behavior, and recognizing complexity. So that empathic concern, a lot of the forms, the definitions we're talking about that we highlighted here shows up in this social emotional convergence. And just Purdue or CILMAR will be able to help you leverage that as much as possible.
And there will be a Habakkuk collection with resources ready for you, with everything that we have used in today's webinar. So if you scan the QR code, it will lead you directly to the collection.
Thank you so much, Tatiana and Kwesi. My heart and my head are just absolutely full with all you've had shared with us today. This was wonderful.
Thank you, everyone.